We spend roughly 1/3 of our life at work. That equates to about 90,000 hours. How does that compare with the rest of our time and the rest of our lives? I thought it might be interesting to track this for myself. So I broke down what the average weekday looks like for me, and I'm going to show that to you. I wake up at 7 and I start my morning routine. At 7:45, my spouse leaves for work. At 8 o'clock, I wake up the baby and I start the baby's morning routine. I leave the house by about 8:30 so that I can meet up with the babysitter at 8:45 and hand off the baby. Then I get to work at about 9 o'clock. So I've been up for about 2 hours at this point, and I've spent about 45 minutes of that with my spouse. Well, not with my spouse. We were awake and in the same house, but doing different things. So 45 minutes awake together, we'll say. I've spent about 45 minutes with my baby, though part of that was driving, and they were in the back seat talking, sort of. We can't communicate super well at this point. Anyway, 2 hours awake. I get to work from 9 until about 6. When the sitter drops off the baby and I head back home. I get home at about 6:15, I start dinner and I start feeding the baby. My spouse gets home at about 6:45, and we eat dinner at about 7 and clean up. And hopefully we have some time to play with the baby. 8 o'clock comes around though, and it's time to get the baby ready for bed and get them off to sleep. Hopefully by 8:30, the baby is in bed and I get to spend some time with my spouse. But then by 9:30, we are off to bed because we have to be up again early in the morning to get ready before the baby needs to get ready. And anyway, so I've spent about 14 and a half hours awake in a given weekday. I've spent, of those 14 hours, about 3.5 of them awake with my spouse. And I've spent 9 of those hours with coworkers. I'm going to spend a lot more time during the given work week with my coworkers than I will with my family. I'm going to see coworkers and students. I'm going to see my bosses and people who report to me much more frequently than I do the people in the world I care most about. I'm going to see coworkers much more frequently than I do friends. I mean, in a given week, how much time do I spend with friends outside of work? Man, that would be a tough one to calculate. Weekends are mostly spent cleaning up the house, doing yard work, going to church, maybe getting a little bit of time with my spouse. We get a babysitter so that we can go out on a date. Maybe every other week we spend 3 or 4 hours with friends. Wow, I spend a lot of time at work. The relationships that I form at work, I have the opportunity to spend a lot more time cultivating than I do the relationships outside of work. But work relationships can be tricky. There are lots of different things that impact and influence my work relationships. There are different hierarchies. I might develop a friendship with someone who is my boss, and that power dynamic could create some conflicts in my friendship. Or maybe I avoid becoming friends with someone who's my boss because I don't want that power dynamic in a friendship. That can make relationships tricky. The different networks that exist within an organization can make relationships tricky. You know, I have friends in various different departments on campus that I don't get to see very often, but I've started to develop friendships with those people. Because we're in different networks within the organization, those relationships don't get as much attention. So they don't develop as quickly or as much depth. Things like productivity and the desire to be productive at work could impact my ability to make and sustain friendships at work. I might have goals that differ from the people around me, and sometimes people use friendships as a way of moving towards their goals. And so that layer of goal and a goal-oriented task, which organizations are centered around, can impact then the relationships that get to happen within that organization. Things like obligations. Why are you at work? Do you have people at home who are counting on you? How might that impact the way you engage at work? Are you there to make friends, or are you there to provide for your family? The desire for financial stability impacts the relationships that you form at work. If you feel that you're undercompensated, it might be hard to develop relationships with the people who you feel have power to make those changes. The reason why I wanted to look at this idea of 90,000 hours, though, is I want you to think about the relationships that you're going to form. Many of you have yet to find a spouse, or maybe that's not important to you. Maybe friendships are more important at this stage. And one thing that you need to think about is that when you join an organization, the amount of time that you have to spend with those other relationships diminishes. So you need to be intentional about what you do with those relationships outside of the organization. But you're going to spend a lot of time at work. That time could become very lonely if you don't invest in some relationships at work. This doesn't mean that you have to develop a best friend who is everything that you want in a best friend who's also a coworker. That might not be possible. But think about the amount of time that you're going to spend at work. Social support is so important. And if you don't have some social support at work, you are going to be less successful and less engaged in your organization. But be careful. There could be a tendency to share a lot at work with your work friends, and then when you get home, you're just tired. And you've already shared the important things. And the people who count on you, whether they're your kids or your spouse or your friends or your family, they might feel like they're getting less of you than you're giving at work. Think through how you want to engage in those 90,000 hours. Because you're going to be spending a lot of time there. And the relationships that you form there could impact the relationships that you have outside of work and outside of your organization. But they could also help you be more effective and successful within your organization. There isn't a right answer or a formula here. This is tricky. And navigating these work relationships is important because of how your work is going to impact other areas in your life. Don't lose your identity at work. But don't forget to be yourself there too, because you might find some beautiful relationships that form.